the goal of the responsible wool standards is the care of land, the care of sheep, and the people who tend both.
Welcome to Leaders of the West, a podcast for innovators and changemakers. I'm your host, Jessie Jarvis, the founder of the West, and I'm sitting down with agriculturalists, entrepreneurs, executives, and everyone in between with the goal of digging into the strategies, mindsets, and lessons that have been crucial to the success of ag and Western. Whether you're carrying on the next generation of your family's operation, starting something from scratch, or determined to climb up the leadership ladder, we're going to inspire you to continue to dream big, growing not just you, but the future of agriculture and Western as a whole. Let's go. In the last few weeks, I've gotten some questions from employers asking how Of the West works, the cost, etc. So I want to take a second to break that down real quick. Pricing is a big deal, and we've worked really hard to make our listings affordable for everyone, from those of you who are one man or woman show to those businesses who are hiring at all times. So first things first, our basic listing. This is priced at $79. The basic listing is as it sounds. Your job is listed on the site and is found by job seekers who are searching for roles like yours. Next up, we have our pro job listing. This option is priced at $99. It's a 45-day listing, as all listings are. You can shorten them as needed with your specific closing date, but if you don't have a closing date, it'll sit on the platform for 45 days. This option also means that your job will be shared across all of our social accounts and in our weekly email newsletters that go out to more than 10,000 subscribers. That's followed by our premium listing, which includes everything in that pro listing, but these jobs are also pinned to the top of all jobs, so they get more time to shine. You can get those for $129. We also have special discounted pricing for internships. Those are priced at $59. It's the cheapest offering that we have, and we created that because we know internships are valuable positions to offer, but it's hard to spend money on them like it is a true employment position. Like all other jobs, again, those live on the site for 45 days at a time. And finally, for those who are hiring for multiple roles, we also have frequency discounts on 5 jobs, 15 jobs, and our unlimited monthly subscription. You know, as I mentioned before, we work really hard to make things affordable for employers and also bring forward great applicants. If you're in the process of hiring, or you know you will be soon and are planning to use Of the West, you can go to our website, ofthewest.co, and list those jobs. Well, hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Leaders of the West. We are here for our first ever Part 2 episode. So last week, if you were listening to the show, you would have heard our interview, Part 1, with Jeanne Carver, who owns Imperial Stock Ranch and also Jeanne Wool Company. Today, we are settling in for Part 2 of that interview. If you guys didn't get a chance to listen to last week's episode, take a pause, go start there. It is truly one of the most incredible stories just because of the perseverance that Jeanne and her late husband Dan showed in being faced with a problem. And not only did they create a solution, that solution has now gone on to impact far more sheep ranching families aside from just their own operation. So today we really dig into Jeanne Wool Company and then the regenerative side of their operation as far as the data and metrics that they have taken to show that they have a net positive impact on nature in their carbon footprint. And I will tell you guys that the data that they have, not only is it wildly exciting for themselves and for other ranchers that are part of Jeanne Wool Company, but this truly is the future of the agriculture industry when it comes to animal agriculture, in my opinion. So I'm really excited to present with you guys Part 2 of our interview with Jeanne Carver. Let's go. Okay, so last week we got to talk a lot about how you and your late husband, Dan, started Imperial Stock Ranch and the history behind the operation, which, as we had mentioned, obviously has been in business since 1871, which is absolutely wild. We talked a lot about the wool side of the business and how your wool has been used in world-renowned products, including being part of the U.S. Olympic team outfits since 2014, so for more than 10 years now. But we didn't get to talk a lot about the regenerative side of your operation, aside from what you and Dan started doing in the late 80s or early 90s with no-till farming, and then working to increase the salmon habitat and that population within Buck Hollow Creek, which is there on your operation. But in addition to the wool operation, you guys have put a ton of work and research into regenerative practices, and you have a really unique story to tell on that front that is not only really powerful for your operation, but has the potential to really make a positive impact for all of agriculture, I would say. And that's what we're going to talk about in today's episode. So in case somebody wasn't able to listen to last week's episode and they're starting here, can you give us just a really quick kind of a synopsis of Imperial Stock Ranch, Shanico Wool Company, and kind of what you guys are?
I'll try to give you my 3-minute elevator pitch, but it probably won't be 3, but I'll do my best. So we ended up living our dream, if you will, at the historic Imperial Stock Ranch in North Central Oregon, which, as you mentioned, did start in 1871 as a 160-acre homestead claim. And in fact, it's really fun. I can go down the creek to 2 miles north of the headquarters where we live and still pick apples off the trees that were planted way back when by the first dwelling, which was a dugout cave in the creek bank where was his first home, Richard Hinton's first home, and where he brought his bride and his children were born. And the early rock fences are there. So we still are there on an ongoing basis because it's part of the ranch. So we had a chance to come here. My husband took over this operation in the late 1980s. And our work was, in his words, we have to see the land win, because the healthier natural resources are, the healthier your harvest will be, and the healthier your bottom line, which ensures our future, not just our family operation, but in truly our collective future. So what we have done is carry on the traditions on this historic ranch, now 153 years of sheep and cattle, grain and hay production. So it's dryland farming, close to 4,000 acres of dryland crops, and hay in the sub-irrigated meadow bottoms, and of course, livestock, cattle and sheep. So we've kept that going throughout all of its history. And our work was focused on management of natural resources, and we worked with local agency partners early on. And by 1989, we had developed a conservation management plan for the entire operation to do exactly what he knew we needed to do, that triple bottom line approach, and began employing a lot of changes in the livestock and the crop practices. So we kept that work going. And then in 1999, we were faced with that challenge I mentioned before, which was we had been selling our wool to the same company for 100 years. And that spring after harvest, we called the wool buyer, who was the face of that company, for us. And we said, what's the price this year, right? As a price taker. And their answer was, sorry, folks, we're not buying. We're closing our processing and going offshore like everybody else, and we're not going to buy the wool. So we were left stunned. It's the day offshoring arrived on our doorstep, and tens of thousands of sheep producers in this country were going out of sheep, a lot driven by the huge decline in our infrastructure for textile and apparel manufacturing. And so my husband gave me the challenge to find our own way to sell that harvest, or sheep would be gone from the land. And so I began the journey a year later, put our first products in the market. We took the lamb forward also. So in parallel, built the supply system for food to restaurants, lamb, and which eventually led to our beef, and our wool into products and into market. And on down that road we went, learning many, many new lessons, changing our life. And then 13 years later, a brand who was looking to make in America again found us and chose our yarns. And 2 years later, we became the face of the first Made in America Olympic uniforms that Ralph Lauren provided to Team USA for the Winter Olympics in Sochi, Russia, 2014. And that changed our life. And a year later, with many, many brands knocking on our door for a traceable, sustainably produced wool supply, we were asked to become involved in this growing effort globally of third-party certification for your harvest, meaning brands don't want, food companies and fashion companies don't want to be associated with land degradation or animal abuse issues or worker situations, poor worker situations. And so we were asked to participate in this third-party standard. And when it officially launched, it was a global standard. It's called the Responsible Wool Standard. Well, then we became the first ranch in the world certified, and we're still certified to this day. And what that did was set the stage to go beyond. Up until now, we had been focused on selling our harvests, right? Converting them to products and selling our harvests. Dan always said you have to save yourself first before you try to take a whole bunch more along. So, and it's true. You start small and then there's intentional growth. That's how you stay alive, right? And so we continued to adapt, and with a growing demand for traceable and sustainably, or however you want to put it these days with the terminology, wool that they could trust in terms of how the land and animals have been cared for, we decided to scale that up, and we launched Shanico Wool Company in 2018 to do exactly that. So today, we built the first farm group in the United States that is certified to the Responsible Wool Standard. We're also certified to Nativa Regenerative, and we are really finding this is the lead reason we are successfully selling at a premium price our wool into a variety of markets. So that's how we got to Shanico Wool. The family ranch is still going. That kind of sums it up.
Well, I'm glad that that's where you ended, because that's kind of where I want to pick up. So as you mentioned, there are a number of ranching families across the West whose operations make up Shanico Wool. Mm-hmm. How did you guys realize or really have that opportunity to know that you needed to add more operations into what you guys were already doing for yourselves? You obviously had the sheep, but you didn't necessarily have enough to meet the demand. So how did you realize, like, a rising tide lifts all ships and we need to get more people on the board?
Well, it was logical. Farmers and ranchers, we're logical. We're also creative. We're persistent, passionate. And I say we're some of the best logistics managers in the world because we're managing people, supplies, animals, and we're maneuvering them to make the whole thing flow, right? So it was logical for me, actually. There was growing demand, and I knew it was just going to be important to scale, or we would simply stay one size forever and not be able to supply for those who needed a much larger program. So it made sense to scale. And I don't know, it was my way of serving the industry. I just felt I was led this way. I really felt led. I never really hesitated. It was the right move. The question I had was, would anybody join me? Who was going to be willing to step off of the commodity model and take a chance on me? I'm not a wool buyer. They all call me a wool buyer, and I keep saying, I'm not a wool buyer, right? I'm one of you. But if you start buying their wool, they start thinking you're a wool buyer, and there's some bad blood there sometimes, right? There's some chances for mistrust. So it took about 3 years to convince them I really was not a wool buyer. But nevertheless, I reached to our regional wool warehouses. That was where I started, because they know everybody. They're on site when people shear. They know the ranchers, because I didn't really know who was a possible candidate. We all have our focus on our own operations, and mostly we don't always know what the guy down the road's doing. We don't know how they do things. We're in our own world, right? We do what we do. Yeah, we see each other here and there at meetings and so on, or we help each other out, particularly when we're fighting fire or something like that. But we don't always know how the guy in the next county tail docks. We don't know that. We don't know what their whole program is unless you start asking. And most of us don't go around asking other people how they do their business. So for me, I called my regional warehouses, and the first one I started with was Utah Wool Marketing, because they serve a big chunk of the West, right? A very important role that they play. And your wool goes there, and those guys receive it. They cork test it, send it off to get the data on that wool, which establishes value. And then typically they run the auctions where the wool sells from all these ranches. They hold the auctions. Sometimes they sell by private treaty, but mostly in this country, the model is it sells at an auction. Even co-op wool, you get bids on it. So I call up my friends at Utah Wool Market and I say, and they knew I was going down this road. And I said, do you have any ranchers that you think might be a fit? Here's kind of the wool parameters I'm looking for, similar to us, micron, staple length, characteristics. I said, but they have to be willing to open the ranch gate to be audited. And he gave me some suggestions. So we called up the first one and I introduced myself. We didn't know this gentleman. He doesn't go to industry meetings and we don't go to that many either. And he was in Nevada. And so Dan and I said, well, let's just take a little trip. So we drove down to Nevada and took him to lunch. And the lunch comes and we're chit-chatting and just, getting to know each other. Real nice, really nice man. And deep history, very deep history with his family. They're French Basque ancestry. Came here to herd sheep. The story of many in the West. Came here to herd sheep as immigrants. And then finally got their own start. And now it's passed through multiple generations of family of French Basque sheep operations. And you could tell the story over and over in the West. We got our lunch served and I started talking to him about the RWS, the Responsible Wool Standard. And I don't get very far and he stopped me. He says, Jeannie, I already know I want to do it. I said, you do? Nobody seems to know what it is. He goes, no, I researched it and I think it's the future and I believe in it and I wanted to do it. And in fact, I was planning to until I got a quote on what it costs you. I said, yeah, it's expensive. For one ranch, it costs $5,000 to $7,000 a year just to be certified. Very expensive. If you get any kind of a premium, it just went away right there. I said, yeah, I realize it's very expensive, but I said, if you join me and I establish a farm group, then I will pay all the expenses. It will cost you nothing to be part of this. I'll guarantee to buy your wool and pay top price or a premium above top U.S. price. I will pay all the costs and I'll do the heavy lifting on the written documentation. We're going to have to have a trusting relationship. You'll have to be really open about your operation with me, but I will carry the bulk of the burden on both cost and paperwork. And you'll just be required to continue to operate in a way that meets the standard, keep up your records once we get it set up, and be willing to be audited. And I'll buy your wool and I'll sell it. And you can walk away anytime you decide it's not for you. He said, sign me up. And he was my first guy. His name is Ted Borda. Borda Land and Sheep Company out of Gardnerville, Nevada, south of Reno and Carson City. And he's still with me. He's an incredible spokesperson for the industry, for land stewardship and best practices. I love the guy. You just talk to him and he makes you laugh, He's what farming and ranching and sheep production in this country are about. And so I could repeat this story with every single family that has joined me. Now that is where I started. Okay. Then when I said, Ted, I think we need another ranch, he said, okay, why don't you call up so-and-so? So he brought the next one. And then he brought another one when I needed them. And she brought 4 more. And this is how it goes. It's been word of mouth. And I add ranches, but only as I grow, because you heard the model. Anyone that comes into my group, I am committed to buying their wool. So as soon as shearing happens, as soon as the core testing happens, and we can establish value, and then we watch the markets. The world price for wool, the best price in the world is set by the Australian market. So we follow the Australian market. That sets the bar for us of what we're going to pay. Okay. We're going to follow that and above, which is more than you get in the United States when you sell wool. And they have not left me. They have been very loyal and they bring each other. So I've tried to make it as easy and smooth for them, take away, the greatest battles for this from a farmer rancher perspective is the added paperwork and the cost. Those are the two biggest challenges to these global certifications, these third-party standards, is cost and paperwork. So we've built up templates. I can interview a rancher and start filling in the information and build out all of their written management plans, much like a consultant would do. So, once I find out if they're interested and then we tackle the most fearful parts of the standard, because everybody has questions and things they've heard. So we have a series of conversations, which are essentially training sessions. We do this with Zoom meetings. We do it by phone. And ultimately, I go and see them. Ultimately, I go to visit them. And we tour their operation and we continue the dialogue. And if we agree that they can meet the standard, and sometimes they have to make some minor adjustments, but if they're willing and they want to do this and they want to join me, and I feel that I'm confident I can bring them to certification, we sign an MOU, a confidentiality agreement. And then I deeply interview them and get everything I need to from their files. And usually I book myself into a motel room in the area and I sit for 3 days and I write. And it takes me 3 to 5 days to really onboard a new ranch. And then I run an audit. And then if there's anything that needs fixed, it's called a non-compliance. Then we work together to get that in shape. And usually it's paperwork. It's always paperwork. It's always written. We get it fixed. And I take the burden of that. They just have to be cooperative, right? And then at that point, when they are fully compliant, in my opinion, they are then considered a member of Shanico Wool Company and they come under my scope and they are certified to the RWS. And then each year we have audits by the certification body that implements the standard for Textile Exchange, whose standard it is, which is a global nonprofit that's mission is to improve the sustainability of the textile and fashion industry, which, by the way, is considered the second leading polluting industry on the planet from all kinds of reasons, from the farm all the way through the spinning and dyeing and weaving and knitting and factories and shipping. It's a waste. And yeah, it's all of the fashion companies and their corporate footprints. So there's a lot to it. It's not just about those of us who grow fiber. But anyway, at that point, then they're part of the group. They're fully certified. And the day they decide they don't want to be, they can send me a text message, an email, or nothing. They can walk out. It's okay. They're free to go. But as long as they're in, I buy their wool every year and I sell it. And they get to know, I keep people posted. So-and-so just launched with, like one that came out here recently is, we all know of Red Wing Boots, the Red Wing Boot Company.
Yeah.
And shoes. So they've launched on their site, you can find the Shanico beanie. It's a knit hat out of 100% our wool, 100% made in America. And they named it the Shanico beanie and it's on the Red Wing website. It's really cool because that's something we can all buy, right? Or the socks, that Defeat's selling, the Defeat sock program where Kent Wool Performance has their 1843 collection, and some blankets just launched with a brand, Blankets and Throws. I got to get that out to everybody. So I tell them where they can go buy their harvest. So it's pretty fun. So that's how we got here.
Wow. That is fascinating. At the end of this episode, you're definitely going to have to give us the names of other places that we can go buy Shanico wool because I'm needing some wool socks for sure. But before we get to any of that, you mentioned some of the standards that obviously a ranch has to meet or reach in order to be considered to join Shanico Wool Company. Can you tell us a little bit more about what some of those standards are?
I'll just say this. The goal of the responsible wool standards is the care of land, the care of sheep, and the people who tend both. It's that simple. If you're ranching in a way that's trying to improve the health of your land, you're most likely going to qualify. If you have a health program for your sheep and have good animal handling practices, you're most likely going to qualify. And if you treat your workers well, pay legal wages, and comply with all state and federal regulations in the United States, you are going to comply. You know, in the United States, we have so much oversight anyway, from the Environmental Protection Agency to the Department of Labor, laws around water. So if you are ranching, it truly is that. I don't have the protocol in front of me, but there are 275 criteria that we're audited to. 275, and they fall within 3 categories: land care, animal welfare, and worker welfare. For instance, do you have hazardous substances or equipment on your ranch that your workers are around? And do you have a warning sign that says hazard, like fuel tanks? Does it show that it's flammable? Are you warning people there's a safety issue here? For us, we also have to comply with SAFE, don't we? So this is not outside normal expectations. In terms of land care, let me think of something. You know, are you working toward efficiency of water use? Let's say that you'd have some irrigation. Do you have a lot of leaks that you don't take care of? Are you wasting water? You know, is there evidence of that? Do you have a plan? How do you go about applying water to your fields? Are you using, good practices? These are the same things we work with Soil and Water Conservation District, with NRCS. These are the same things. The difference is, do you have a written plan that explains what you're doing?
And I was just about to say that. I can imagine and again, by no means am I trying to water it down, but it kind of sounds like 90% of these things are aspects and elements that most everybody is already doing. It's mainly just the documentation process, or like you said, like,
exactly correct.
Do you have this is flammable sign? Maybe, maybe not. Like those, and I do not want to call them little things by any means, but it's not some really big glaring issue of, oh, you are really significantly missing the mark here.
There are some key ones. Let's go to the animal welfare. They want to know that you have a health program for your sheep. Do you either test them for parasite load, and it's so low that your veterinarian says you don't need to treat them for parasites? Or do you have a pesticide? You have a treatment program? Most people do. What do you do when you have lameness? Do you treat it? And how do you do that? If you doctor an animal, do you mark it in some way so that when it's time for that second, do you separate animals that are in really poor body condition to kind of give them some extra nutrition to get them up so they can join the herd again? You see what I'm saying?
Yes, absolutely.
These are pretty logical, but I can tell you that no rancher that has joined me has already had all that they do in writing.
No, and it really is the documentation process. And I was even thinking
Exactly.
that because our operation, we audit through IMI Global for all of our cattle. And same thing. A lot of it is obviously 98% of it things we're already doing, but the documentation process is really the difficult part in order to get started.
Yeah. So that's what it's about. So that's really it. I don't know where you're going to go next with the questions, but we were the first ranch in the world certified. Then I started Shanico. Ranches started joining me. We're the first farm group in the United States to have a scaled supply of wool meeting this standard. We were out front within our own industry in this country on doing this kind of a program, which is growing rapidly globally. I will tell you that. It's becoming ever more important. There are buyers who are saying, you can have the best wool in the world, but if you're not certified to the RWS standard, we're not interested. It's getting to that point in some parts of the world where fashion and apparel is made, because it does help de-risk brands, and it helps make sure that we're doing things that are better for the earth in every way. So this is the driving piece of it, but the standard itself does not have a way to really prove whether or not, if you're ranching to these 275 criteria, are you ranching in a way that's better for the earth? Are you? or aren't you? That's not what the standard's about. It's about a mindset and practices, but nobody is actually measuring what kind of an impact you're having, right? Because that hasn't been developed yet. I think one day that's coming. It's not here yet. But for us, it is because I had that question. I had that question from fashion brands face to face to me in the winter of 2019. They challenged me on whether the way we are ranching is having a negative impact on the earth with livestock agriculture. I faced that question straight up. And, all of us, probably your listeners, we have a pretty good sense of whether we're making a difference. We have a pretty good sense if these meadows are improving or not. If we have yield data, we have weaning weights, we have species counts with our fish and wildlife partners, we have agency testimony, we may have some monitoring. We have a lot of indicators of whether this land is continuing in pretty good shape or whether it's degrading for us. What's our performance? What's our report card look like? But typically there's no report card. Am I right?
Correct.
Right. And so when I was asked that, I was passionate in my response in terms of our observations, which I shared with you in our earlier conversation about the importance of indicator species and species counts. If we're changing the land and we're improving habitat and we're showing an increase in some key indicator species, it's a pretty good indication that our ranching impact is positive and not negative. Okay. Which is going to ensure our collective future, all of us, people and animals and plants. I could respond with our observations, our species counts, our yield data, what we had in hand to prove our value from an environmental perspective, but I didn't have any data. I didn't have what people would consider proof. I had agency testimony. I had an auditors checking all the boxes that we complied with these third-party standards. But for some cases, that's not enough. They want something more. And so that was the motivation for us to take the work I've been engaged in now for 5 years, since 2019. We began our measurement journey in 2020. So we're 5 years into that measurement journey to determine what the real environmental value is of our work on the land.
Well, I'm glad that is what you are chatting about now, because that was my question, or my next question is, can you talk about how you are working to prove Imperial Stock Ranch's net positive impact to nature? That is the important phrase here, net positive impact to nature. You've been able to now prove that through this data that you have taken and established. Give us all the details.
Well, we knew right off. First of all, I didn't know if you could figure it out. I'm not a scientist, just like I'm not a wool buyer, right? I started asking around because I knew that when I finished that conversation that day, I knew that we didn't have the answers we needed. And I wanted to know, could we get them? And if it was possible, and who could do it? So I started asking questions, and I ended up being pointed to a range scientist at Oregon State University who's now retired, but still working for me as a consultant. His name is Dr. John Talbot. Grew up in Wyoming on a ranching operation, went to school, studied, ultimately had his PhD, and he spent a lifetime in the arena of livestock agriculture and carbon capture and ecosystem markets. He was there when the Chicago Climate Exchange was built and failed. He understands why. He developed the Big Sky Project out of Montana and sold credits. We're talking years ago into Washington, D.C. from those ranches. So he understood the challenges. He said, Jeanne, yes, we can measure your net footprint at the end of the day. We can do that. But if we do it, we need to build a model that will meet all challengers. I said, then let's do it. So as we got underway, I said, John, I don't want to just do this on our ranch. I want to do this across all the ranches that are part of Shenango Wool Company, which is 10, right? We're talking 2.6 million acres that combined of what we manage and graze in Oregon, Idaho, Colorado, Nevada, California, and we're also grazing in Wyoming and Utah. So we're touching 7 states with this project. It's a great laboratory, actually. So John built the model, and he's then brought subsequent PhDs into the project. We've probably had 5 different PhDs on this project. I also hire as a consultant a GIS soil scientist who was the lead GIS soil scientist for the state of Oregon in his career for years until he retired. So he's an expert at helping us do something very important, which is site monitoring points. So they are cited. We have to be credible at every level of this. So in how many data points you're going to have, where they're going to be cited, how they're cited, that we're going to go back to every year and collect soil samples down to 60 centimeters to be analyzed so we can track soil nitrogen, soil organic carbon, organic matter, soil moisture, and a host of things. We're going to collect at those same points biomass, residual biomass, which is carbon left standing after we graze. That counts too. So photo points, and then the measurement and calculation of methane emissions from our livestock, as well as accounting for all of our inputs. So we all earn money, right? We all earn money and we all spend money. This is how simple I like to think about it, even though this is a complex project. At the end of the year, did we add to our wealth? Did we put money in the bank at the end of the year, or did we add to our debt?
Mm-hmm.
Right? I think of this in the same way with the environment. We're farming and ranching. We're managing and interconnected relationships of natural resources, soil health, vegetation communities, water. And our key tool in managing this landscape is our grazing animals. They are here for a reason. Their work of purpose that we all need, right, is biting plants. They've been put here by someone smarter than us to bite plants. So plant communities and grazing animals are synergistic. And many people in the audience may know the science better than me, but biting those plants stimulates them for root growth, for biomass above and below ground, seed head production. This is vital to the health of plant communities, as well as all the associated impacts they make moving across the landscape by returning carbon and nutrients back to the land through their urine and manure, and the hoof impacts to prepare seed bed or to hold water in those little imprints, and to put organic matter in contact with the soil so it breaks down. So they do a lot of things besides just consume forage, right? The point being that all of these actions are creating a positive impact to the plant communities, that in the response they make to that stimulation, they are drawing CO2 out of the atmosphere, which breaks apart, and they're banking carbon into the ground. And we can measure that. We can track that. That's a key performance indicator. So I don't know where I was in the story, but these scientists we're going to account for our inputs like our electrical use on the farm and ranch, all of our equipment and fossil fuel use, our methane emissions from those livestock, and any inputs we put. But we're going to track what we're adding to the land by tracking through the soil tests and analysis, biomass analysis, and some of the leading computer models. And at the end of the day, we're going to find out what is the net impact. Are we putting carbon in the atmosphere and greenhouse gas emissions, methane, or are we reducing it and banking it into the land? That's the question. You know what? I wish it wasn't more complicated than it needed to be. But I can tell you this, we have 5 years of data. The first year, you don't really know what you have. And I didn't know what we would find out when we started measuring. I had no idea. I didn't know what it would tell us. But I knew one thing, we would have more information than we had had up to now.
Right.
We would have more information. And the next year, when we got another round of data, it's going to tell us which direction we're going, and year 3 and year 4 and year 5. So these are not self-done we're not going out and doing it ourselves as ranches. This is third-party generated data by a third-party entity, meaning a research institution. So we're not doing the sampling ourselves. That's what makes this credible.
I was just going to say there's no bias in the information.
Right. We're not going to try to swing, and the soils and the biomass go through separate laboratories. They're state of the art and analysis. And then they run statistical analysis. They organize the data and they produce an impact report or a set of information back to each ranch and to me, both ranch by ranch, which is a huge plus for us to help motivate us and to inform us on future decisions and practices. But I get the aggregate result to tell us which way we're going. So what I can tell you is that at the end of 23, with half of the ranches have been fully evaluated. It's a pretty deep process and it takes time and it takes an investment. But we've been fortunate that Oregon State University has taken this project on. But with 3 years of data on half of the ranches, every one of those ranches, their net footprint is that they are banking more carbon than we are releasing. So we're net carbon sinks. Our greenhouse gas emissions is a net negative total. And those 5 ranches avoided an additional 75,000 tons of CO2 equivalents in last year, 2023. Those credits of avoided CO2, reduced emissions values, if we were in Europe where there's a market for that, those are worth like $29 a ton, I've been told, which is a huge, it's like $2 million. So I know for a fact that the environmental deliverable, the ecosystem and climate deliverable we're making as an agricultural operation, if we measure it, and if over time we're delivering a net positive impact, it has a value in emerging markets today. And in fact, our Oregon ranch is in year 3 of a contract that is earning a new income stream for that deliverable that's being measured and substantiated and verified by credible outside entities. Not Oregon State. That's separate. Now, when you go into that phase, your research institution, they don't use your data. That data opened the door for this kind of participation in a legitimate market.
And honestly, how powerful for the future of animal agriculture as a whole. Like, yes, it's absolutely wonderful for you guys, but this is the narrative that I feel like whether you are a cattle producer or a sheep producer, like this is the negative narrative that we are fighting every moment of the day is
every moment of the day. Where, in fact, I don't know. I'm no expert. I'm an expert at nothing. I feel like everything you learn just opens the door to more questions. But somewhere along the line, grazing became a bad word. How did that happen?
I genuinely don't know, but that kind of data and information is what has the potential to change that narrative. And I think that anybody listening to this right now who is a part of animal agriculture should just be ecstatic right now.
In fact, it's imperative we have this information in order to change the narrative. We're not going to change it without the data. We're not going to change it without the science that proves that perhaps our greatest deliverable beyond the food, clothing, and shelter that's providing survival capability to humankind on the planet, perhaps our greatest deliverable today is this. It's the environmental deliverable we're generating through the production of food and fiber. But if we don't measure it, we don't know.
No. And I know we're kind of getting short on time because you've got to run, but I do have one kind of final question that I have a feeling our audience of listeners are probably asking themselves right now. You guys have kind of developed this data and the standard in a way, of course, third-party certification, but how can other producers within our industry, at what point are they going to be able to do the same thing to then record what is hopefully their net positive impact on nature as well?
Well, what we're doing is very replicable. It's very replicable. And there are in ecosystem services companies out there, and some of your listeners may already be on contract. So this is a stakeholder that we have not, as an industry, we haven't known they're there. They're there. And what they do, and there's a lot of people trying to get in the game on this, so do vet carefully. But there are multiple companies out there who are looking to sign ranchers up for their land deliverable, for that ecosystem deliverable. Just be cautious, read carefully, ask questions, ask your neighbors, and usually you need to have some scale or you need to come in as a part of a group, but they will pay for all the measurement. They will establish your baseline, and they will do the repeated measurement necessary to establish that you are generating this, and then they buy it. And there's a whole rigorous MRV layers of credibility that have to be gone through before you can register a legitimate credit in these markets. So I feel like not everybody has to go out and do the research we've done. I think what's key is finding the right partner to participate in this emerging market, because this income stream for me can be a game changer for family agriculture as we're on the border of making it or not. Our input costs are rising at a level that the sale of our harvests are not really making up for. You can't, you look at labor costs, seed, fuel. Every time we try to sell our harvest, people want the best possible price, and they push us down on price always. So how are we going to overcome that? Well, this is perhaps a new way. Everybody's talking about the condition of the environment and the climate. Well, if you want us managing broad landscapes to be part of the solution, then they're going to have to pay for that solution. And I really think these are stakeholders that we have been missing up to now. And I think they're important new stakeholders for our industry. I just think we have to vet them.
Oh, amen to that. Well, Jeanne, this has been a fabulous series of episodes. I am just so appreciative of you sharing your time with us and your knowledge and just your passion for the industry. I hope that there are people out here who are listening to this, realizing what you and your late husband have accomplished, and just realize that they can do the same thing for themselves and their neighbors and others in their industry. There is a reason that you are a leader within the sheep industry, and I would even just say animal agriculture as a whole. And I am so appreciative of you for spending time with us these last 2 weeks. So with that, you guys, this is the end of our episode. But as always, you guys can catch us back here next week.
If you loved this episode, do us a favor and share it with someone else who might find just as much value in it as you did. We're on a mission to continue to grow and strengthen the future of agriculture and Western industries, and you spreading the word helps us make more of a positive impact. It also makes a big difference when you take a minute to go rate and review the show. We can't thank you enough for listening, for sharing, and for loving Ag and Western as much as we do. We'll see you back here for our next episode.